Welcome, Lauren, to the latest current edition of Founders Talk. It's a pleasure to have you on this side of the border. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But one of the things I want you to know, Lauren, about Rally is that the reason why we exist is to help passionate entrepreneurs transform their ideas and existing work into sustainable ventures that create positive social change. And so we've been doing that for quite a while, and we've actually come to the conclusion that we can be an international hub for social entrepreneurs, right? So no matter where they're at in the world, that they should take a stop through here because we have the right people, we have the right networks, we have the right knowledge to move them forward in their journey. And so today you represent a piece of the network, although you're on the other side of the border. Canada, to be more precise, but you're a friend, and we're glad to have you above us. And so because of that, your representation, and we want to showcase you and your awesomeness. And so, welcome to this edition of Rally Founders Talk. How you doing today?
Thank you for having me. It's we've been chatting for a while, Kyle, so it's really nice to connect in this kind of way.
It is nice to connect in this way. So today, you, myself, and Ben Hoyer are going to have this discussion. And the way that we like to start this thing off, which is a question nobody ever gets, but you'll get it here. Tell us about Baby Lauren. Who is Baby Lauren? Not necessarily the clothes that you wore or the cartoons you like to watch, but more importantly, what are the factors, the things that Baby Lauren set in that helped her become the woman she is today, right? And the things that are interesting to you today. Talk to us a little bit about Baby Lauren.
You know what, Kyle? That's a great question. I think that's a fabulous question, and I took a couple of minutes before we jumped on just to sort of like write down a couple of thoughts. And one thing.
You didn't write down that one, did you?
No, I didn't write that down, but I think a really good start to answer that question is to respond to sort of the values that I hold today that were certainly derived and evolved over time and, changed a little bit. But I think at the root, Baby Lauren, her values, my top three are nurture, fun, and stoicism, which may seem very contradictory, but let me explain a little bit. I come from a mixed background. So I've lived my whole life in Nova Scotia outside of university, but Baby Lauren comes from a Chinese family and then sort of like a mixed English-Scottish side of the family. And so I definitely was raised with a lot of determination. Both sides of my family sort of came here for opportunity. And part of that immigrant story is working really hard. And if you want to have that, if you want to be wealthy, if you want financial health and to make it, then you need to work really hard. Again, typical in some of the immigrant stories is entrepreneurship. And my Chinese granddad started restaurants. Mind blowing, I know. What Chinese immigrant?
You said it, I didn't say it.
Food, and at one point in time, he just turned 92. So I'm lucky enough to have like.
Well, your grandfather is 92 years old?
92, yeah.
Wow.
And at one point in time, my mom was telling me recently that they actually had 7 restaurants across the province and 2 motels. Wow. So the 2 motels had like takeiotis attached to them.
What so there's one. Wait, what's a takeiote?
A takeiote is like takeout food, just a way.
Oh, that's the way you say it in Canada. I'm sorry, takeiote.
Well, my grandparents who don't speak great English would call it that.
Oh, takeiote. Okay.
Yeah, takeiote.
Okay.
Yeah, and like Halifax is Halifaxy, so it's one of those things. So all that to say, I grew up in a home where on both sides of my family, food was really important. And coming together for dinner together was ultra important because it was a way for all of us to stay connected. And it was definitely a caregiving thing. Now you got to be on time because no one's necessarily saving you leftovers. So be on time.
All right.
Also a bit of competitive pieces there. So yeah, so a lot of love and community building in my family. Certainly a lot of expectation that we take care of each other as we age as well. So that nurture piece is really there. The fun piece, always there. You know, baby Lauren was running around, swimming, laughing, singing, dancing, total ham. Most pictures of me of it as a kid, you'll see like some sort of pose, like, you know, I'm doing anything but, and then someone says, Lauren, we're taking a picture, and there's like a, hey, we're here having fun taking pictures. So lots of fun for me. And I'd say in my experience over time, the times where I get the most rub or friction is when I'm not having a good time. And it's not to say that you don't work hard, but if there isn't some fun and laughter mixed in there,
I agree with that.
That shit's too serious. Yeah.
But you got to reconcile that with the stoicism, because when I think of stoic, I think of Queen Elizabeth, and she doesn't look fun.
You know, I'm certainly learning more about the philosophy of stoicism, but to me, I would say this is maybe not necessarily derived from childhood, but sort of experience over time when stuff isn't always fun and isn't always sunshine, but how derailed you get by a situation. You know, can you sort of, to use, I guess, a boat term, you know, Atlantic Canadian, you know, like when the storm comes, how much is that boat rocking? Are we anchored and can we sort of like weather the waves, or are we out adrift and pulled in all directions with it? And I've certainly been on both sides of that one.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for giving us the foundation that baby Lauren set on. When you went to college, when you left home, you went to, what did you go to study? And
biopsychology.
Wait, say that again.
Biopsychology, which is an incredibly fancy way of saying biology plus psychology, which is really more of a focus, like psychology study, but more from like neuroscience perspective.
Why did you pick that? Was it your family wanted you to go into that direction? Because typically what I hear is that in immigrant families, they want their children to go into, I don't know necessarily how to describe it, but like these safe, high earning jobs like engineers,
professional
doctors, lawyers, those things. And so was that something that was driven by them, or was that something that was partially you or all you?
I'm not sure where I picked up that. I think it was elementary school. When you're in school, they don't talk about the millions of kinds of random jobs you could have. They talk about things that are very solid, that have like very clear career paths, like being a doctor or a teacher or a nurse, or, you know, these kinds of things. And I also happened to like a lot of surgery shows when I was about 10. So I feel like when I was 10 and I was watching TLC when it was actually the Learning Channel and not like reality TV. I was watching like surgeries and people get put back together, and thinking that, you know, healthcare was a profession that I could get into because I have this nurturing sort of side of me. And so over time that evolved. It was like surgeon, and then it was pharmacist, and then it was psychologists. And then I learned that psychiatrists make like 3 times the money. And at that point, when I graduated high school, you know, being financially wealthy was more important to me than it is now. And so that was why I chose biopsychology. There were only a couple of places in the country that offered the program. But again, that like, ooh, what makes people tick? But also I really like the neuroscience component of it. And so wanted to explore. And paired with that, I had the opportunity to get a full ride scholarship to play volleyball.
That's right. You were a world-class volleyball player.
Country class? World, I don't know. I didn't quite venture into the world, but in Canada, yeah, I did fairly decently.
Are you really 6'4"? How tall are you?
I think my coach would have wished he could have listed me as 6'4". I didn't quite bust through the 6 foot ceiling. I'm like just around it. Yeah.
You know what's interesting is that Ben's wife was a world-class volleyball player too, and she's not 6'4". She's like
yeah.
5'3".
What position does she play, Ben?
Setter. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Not that girls can't hop. Okay, that's why I play middle. It's only because
Oh, I know girls can
hops.
hop. I
Certainly
mean,
was
my
the
wife
tall girl
hops.
position.
So
Mhm.
she hops further than most men.
I
So
love that.
yeah.
I think that's so awesome.
So what
So
I
I went
think
to the
is
University of Winnipeg.
okay.
Winnipeg, like close to the polar bears type university. I mean, big city, but
I mean,
polar bears
like
up north
I don't.
Churchill.
It's how in terms of Canada, the Canadian university system, the University of Winnipeg, like, is it like an Ivy League? Is it like a University of Michigan or a University of Florida, or is it like like what tier? Is it a highly competitive university?
So in sports, of the sports that the university had, yes. So I guess the university league here is now called U Sport. Terrible branding name. Used to be called the CIS when I played. So CIS is country, like the Canada-wide university, and you'd have ACAA, which is like college. But I don't think we rank our schools totally the same as you guys do in the States. But I'd say in terms of undergrad university, probably one of the top focused on undergrad. Yeah, and then there's some universities like in Toronto, like University of Toronto, that would have lots of masters and undergrad type opportunities. This is more undergrad type focus.
So I think what's interesting is that you obviously are not a biopsychologist. You still coach volleyball, I believe, but you're definitely not a biopsychologist. And so, and what I think is what the piece I think is interesting is that I was also a biology major with a minor in mathematics, and I wanted to become a dentist, right? And I think to myself, what was interesting about that, because I didn't like. So when I think back on that question, like what was interesting, I come to the conclusion that I was more fascinated with the way that it wasn't biology that I was fascinated with. I was just fascinated with learning about systems and how they ran and operated and were put together. Have you put any thought on like making the connection between all of that stuff and what you do today?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, individual psychology is very interesting. And I'm just at the point now where I'm starting to like dig back into the more recent research part of it. Like I've very much been a practitioner in the field, I would say, you know, working with different entrepreneurs that are looking to start organizations that create change. But at the end of the day, we're all human and we make decisions for better or for worse with the information that we have. And sometimes those aren't the right decisions. And so are those conscious decisions though, or are they unconscious decisions? And so over the last number of years, that's become something of interest to me, is like this self-awareness that we do or don't possess, and how whether or not we are conscious of something or we don't know. You know, we know what we know what we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. So the more we can know that we don't know, to me, that's more awareness.
Yeah.
And you can either find assistance to grow or develop or find the resources you need, or you can just move on from that. But I've seen the biggest trouble I've seen entrepreneurs get into is when they don't know what they don't know and they don't want to have the awareness.
Yeah. Okay.
To know what they don't know.
So
yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I was just thinking that I'm glad that you mentioned that, Lauren, like the problem being you don't know what you don't know. And if you enjoy the ignorance or prefer to go with what you do know, if you're not curious, creating problems for entrepreneurs. Can you say a little bit more? You said you've seen that be a problem consistently. Can you describe how is that a problem? Where does that show up for entrepreneurs if they are not curious about what they don't know?
In lots of places, particularly around the human dynamics, which again is my favorite thing. And you'll hear me talk lots about it. I guess, you know, at turning 32, I'm developing an expertise, if you will. That's amazing. But in lots of different ways, like with the self, I have to be this one thing. This is the one way to get down that path. So I must do X, Y, Z, even though I will be tortured and my soul will be eaten up alive if I do X, Y, Z. So I've seen it with people, and then I've seen like you said, sort of that blissful ignorance of like, well, that's not really a problem. I don't know how that affects other people. But when you're a leader of an organization, you have a team, that certainly affects everybody, whether or not you know about that. So I've seen that in partially from myself. I'm sure you guys have seen something similar in yourselves as well, as you have different opportunities through time, you find yourself in similar scenarios where you'll see certain themes come up. And I've got a couple. People tell me things, like people I've never met before on planes telling me very personal stuff. I'm welcome. I'm happy to hear it. I can't get anywhere else on this plane except the bathroom. So I guess I'm going to be here to listen. And, the stories are interesting. But yeah, people tell me things. And second, what was the second one? My husband just came home and I heard the door slam. I'll come back to it. Yeah, people tell me things and I'll come back to it.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fair. We can come back to it.
But you're talking about like people having a self-awareness. So like in my head, when you describe that, I thought about, we spent a lot of time trying to get people to validate their assumptions about the customer segment that they're working with, or the problem that they identify that a customer might have, where they make assumptions but validate and hear back. And in that case, then what you don't know about the problem or the customer could really become a problem. But I hear you saying that what you don't know about yourself, about the way that you're coming off, the way that you are presenting to people, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, thank you. That was the second one. People tell me things. B, I need to be conscious at times. If I'm not feeling like my 100% jazzed, my energy when I walk in a room can come off either like, oh my God, wow, energy, let's look this way. And then if I'm working with my team and I had a crappy day or a crappy meeting, I need to sort of like be careful about how I come into the space, because sometimes it'd be like, oh, I like didn't even talk to Lauren and I know that meeting didn't go well. Right. And sometimes that could be fine that the meeting didn't go well, but not everyone else was in it. So to sort of have an openness about that, I think is fairly important. But I'd say one that's really obvious that comes to mind about like not having a conscious awareness about something is our relationship with money. So I've got a really good book. If you guys are ever looking to really question yourself and maybe your sanity, read the book called The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. So she helped start the Pachamama Alliance. It's a really interesting story. It's kind of long, but like very, very interesting. But you may have been in a situation where you don't understand why a business is investing in something, especially as like a business development or an external facing person. Some of those decisions that are made to invest where, and you're sitting there not having a clear understanding of why. That founder or leader might not know why either. Like, oh, sure, we're going to go buy this equipment to make this decision, but there's little baby founder has some sort of belief about money that is likely rooted between the time they were, born to the time they were 7 years old, developing those like core beliefs. And so how does that show up? Could be spending excessively. There's a woman that I knew that actually runs an organization that is more driven on a barter system. And she was looking to scale that model, and she had people very interested in learning about it. And they actually had money for her. Here's the free money. Here it is for you to go train people, to like get supplies, whatever you need. Didn't even want it. Had such a fundamental like disregard and detachment from money based on the way that she was brought up, that she couldn't even think about taking money that was free and people wanting to help her. Doesn't that sound crazy? That's a belief though.
Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I feel like, I want to check that book out, because I feel like I have noticed how much, for myself, your interactions with money as a kid affect the way that you think about money. I mean, that's true about all of our patterns of thinking, right? But money is such a we take for granted that we know how to use it and we know what it's for, and that it's not, it's an inanimate thing, so we don't have a relationship with it, but it's such a common thread through all the things. It's interesting thing to have not been examined. That's cool that you bring that up. Thanks, Lauren.
No problem.
So I want to get to this. I think you have a lot to say about this conscious stuff, but before we do, I just want to bridge really quickly the gap between realizing you weren't going to become a biopsychologist and then somehow you ended up in entrepreneurship, but more specifically social entrepreneurship, and then you are where you are today. So can you just kind of talk about what, not necessarily go into detail about like what you did in each one of those things, but like what were the decision points that were driving the change from I don't want to be a biopsychologist to over to where you are now?
The TSN turning points, as I would call them. So one TSN turning point, the first, third year university, I'm playing volleyball, and one of my best friends in the team, we're sitting in the team room, you know, we just go hang out there between class. And she said to me, Lauren, it was the first and only time someone ever actually asked me this question. Do you really want to be a doctor? No, I don't want to be a doctor. 12 years of medical school, like on top of this, I don't even like school.
Yeah.
So that was decision the first. I got into business because to me, it wasn't going to take me long to finish my second degree, which is great. But organizational behavior is something you study within the concept of business. And to me, that is the exact same concept, but different application of psychology on a team, but in a different way. So that was the first. Second was in 2013, finding out that my dad was terminally ill. So that was TSN turning point the second. And that's when I stopped. Well, that through that process, my father found out in February that he had stage 4 liver cancer. I found out in April. I moved home in May, and he was gone 2 days before Christmas that December. And I was his primary caretaker. And my parents had been entrepreneurs. They had 2 car dealerships. They had worked their asses off through this, you know, built their own little empire. And at that time, my dad actually wanted me to take over the Honda and the Hyundai dealerships, which absolutely would have been one track of entrepreneurship. Franchisee model, push and iron, very lucrative, very fancy lifestyle, even if you're just on the Atlantic coast with 2 little dealerships. You know, I had seen some of like just even the bonus trips, you know, 7-course meals, cruises, this, blah, 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 free gifts every night. I'm like, even at that time, before I knew dad was sick, it seemed like too much, like this is excessive. So anywho, primary caretaker of dad in 2013, and then he passed away before Christmas. And my parents had played the game. They'd always taught my sister and I about, like, you know, saving money and these kinds of things. And they had played the game so perfectly that when they retired, they were going to do exactly what they wanted to do, which was continuing travel the world, see music, these kinds of things. But it didn't happen. And so that was a TSN turning point for me, because all of a sudden money stopped mattering so much. It's like, who gives a shit? Like, quite frankly, he's not here. He can't spend it. Mom's now sitting here feeling guilty about spending it because she gets to do it and he doesn't, you know? So that was TSN turning point the second. Third was getting into the startup community in Halifax. All the offers I had for my, what I call my first big girl job, like, you know, outside of a bar. When I say TSN turning point, Jason, I just mean like, oh, the big play, like this was like a turning, like a pivotal moment in the trajectory of where this game was going. You know, sport references helps my brain sometimes. Yeah, and third was getting to startup community. Every offer I had for a first job was with a startup. And so it was kind of like, well, I'm picking this or I'm not going to have a job. And so I got introduced to entrepreneurship from that perspective. Fourth TSN turning point was knowing that culture was of utmost importance to me, and that building it takes a lot of work, and that I wasn't going to work in a place where I thought this is going to be a negative, fear-driven culture. I've been in high performance organizations. This is not how to achieve. It's one way to achieve that. I shouldn't say it's one way to achieve it, not the way I'd like to participate in that growth. And so a couple gigs later, I found myself in a nonprofit, and I met a guy named Dave who was running Common Good Solutions. And that's actually how I started learning about social entrepreneurship, was through a couple of people I met through the network that introduced me to the concept. Fast forward a couple of years where I'm at my first National Social Enterprise Conference at the University of Winnipeg. So go figure, I then learned years later after I graduated that U of W is actually a hotbed of social enterprise, and it was just across the street from the gym and not in the labs. So that's really how I came to this point here, was through all those startup experiences, trying to help get organizations to become more stable, learning about how to sell as a startup, and then sort of falling into the world of social entrepreneurship, where you find this sweet in-between of not having to prioritize shareholder returns, but also create impact. And certainly as COVID has continued to go on and kept this light shining on, any and all of the inequities that we're seeing around the world, certainly continues to fuel my fire around why creating and supporting high performance teams to scale these really great solutions is important.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, a few of those turning points, I think you call it TSNs.
Yeah.
they resonate with me, and I've seen them play out in other folks. But I did, like, for me, just I remember one of those things for me was like, I realized I was looking at the way my life was, and I was just, my mortality fell into my consciousness, and I was like, well, man, like if I aspire today, which is a very, I think, a morbid thought to have at like 28, 29 when I had it. I was like, well, what would people say about me? Like, did I do anything except, I turned it up at the bar. I look good. My closet's full of nice clothes, but like beyond that, like I felt like there's something else, and that was a real turning point, because then I think my mind started to shift outwardly to how can I contribute to the world and make it better, right? So a lot of those things you talk about really resonates with me. I want to get now into the work you're doing now. You're talking about this consciousness, and so this conscious leadership, and so let's talk about that a little bit. Like describe at the crux what is it that you do now, and how does it help people?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little bit about the organization I'm working with now. So I'm working with a group called Imaginal Ventures, small team, we're currently growing. But Imaginal takes a systemic approach to creating growth in businesses. And so we believe that there's sort of an integration, a continuous balance between the business mechanics in an organization, so the revenues, efficiencies, and profits, and human dynamics in an organization. So building the collective capability of leadership and teams. So it's the continuous balance and integration of those things that helps drive sustainable growth. Human dynamics drives the business mechanics. And one of my favorite, quotes that we use is that businesses don't transform, people do, and leaders go first. And so that's sort of what we do. We have a unique methodology that we use with organizations to help them scale their profits and impact. And so Dorothy, who founded Imaginal, I actually met on day 2 of my first big girl job in Halifax. So she's been a mentor of mine for some time. I've taken lots of her training. Common Good Solutions was a client of Imaginal as we were scaling our growth. Mm-hmm. And then COVID happened. I was away from Common Good, and now I'm with Imaginal. And so I am currently doing business development work and client advisory using this methodology. So helping people continue to grow their impact and create really awesome teams and cultures.
So how do you do that? I mean, let's talk about that. I mean, like,
so how
sounds
do
good.
Do that?
I mean, I know. I mean, yeah. Like, how do you do that? Like, is there a framework, or is it step one?
So our unique methodology across those 4 systems, each of those 4 systems has, you know, tips, tricks, methods, tools to use to help you focus on building out that piece of your business. And we also do a lot of training. So training or advisory is the way we do our work. And we're in the middle of building the MVP of an online platform that will allow people to have even more visibility into implementing these pieces into their business as they scale. Of course, the parts that interest me most are, you know, our ability to actually measure cultural health as well as trust in an organization.
Well, that's interesting. So how do you measure cultural health? I mean, so you know what? And then I'm gonna ask you that question. How do you measure cultural health? And then I'm gonna say, like, if you're a small startup, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, like, how do you do that in that arena? And then and if you're not, what are some of the more important things that people need to be thinking about in order to create good cultural health?
Love that. Thank you for the segue. So the tool that we use to measure cultural health, we actually work with an organization called the Barrett's Value Center. They're in the US with you guys. They've got some crazy, amazing research, particularly around the shift in values in organizations since COVID started. So they're called the Barrett's Value Center. And so what they do is they would take get everyone in the organization to take this, you know, little assessment, which would give them evidence and ways to see what everyone's personal values are compared to the current cultural values, the way that everyone in the organization sees them, and then compares those to the desired values that the organization is requesting. The tool that we built that we, you know, is our IP, we call a trust barometer. And so that's another indicator that's like a series of questions and an assessment that is doled out to the team to understand how clear or unclear the alignment is in the organization and whether or not you're operating in what we call a trust tax or a trust dividend.
Okay.
Now, when you are starting up and you only have 2, 3, 4, 5 people, the human dynamics part of what you're building is not quite as important yet. It's when you start to scale that's going to become critically important. I would say from a small team perspective, it's really important that the first couple of people you're working with really buy into your vision and are with you on that ride. You know, if they're not called co-founders, you want them to act like co-founders in terms of like really owning it and pushing it forward. Make sure you share values with that person, that you guys are aligned that way, because if someone's a little more leaning towards, well, depending on how you work together, it might be beneficial to have someone thinking about the money and have someone thinking about the impact and making sure that both of those things are happening. But you certainly don't want any blow-ups happening on a 2-person founding team. That's too much distraction.
Yeah, that's where it all happens too. I mean, that's where it blow-ups happen. Like founders, their value sets aren't necessarily aligned, and that happened. Well, I shouldn't say it was a blow-up, but I had a realization in one of my first startups that my co-founder, who I worked very well with, and we did some cool stuff together. But ultimately, I knew that ride was going to come to an end because the things that he cared about and what I cared about were 2 separate things. And so he was very money driven, and for him it was about success. Success was around dollars and scale, and for me, success was completely different. And as a result, you know, like we were approaching decisions completely different, right? And that wasn't going to be sustainable. So I agree with you on founders being aligned, and I think that's maybe just a conversation that needs to happen, and then somehow that needs to be institutionalized very early on. Like, here's what we care about, and then that needs to be transferred over. I mean, is that what it looks like to you, or is it something different?
No, that's what it looks like to me. Like, to me, in the safest terms, write stuff down. Just it's one thing to have a verbal agreement, but like document stuff, especially as the team starts to grow. Because it's one thing that we agree on these things on the good days. It's on the bad days that we need to agree how we're going to manage problems or approach solutions in that kind of context. Because when things are going swimmingly and the world is our oyster, like everyone's feeling good. Everyone loves to win. If you're sitting on the bench and your team's winning, you don't really complain about sitting on the bench because you're winning.
Right.
So when you're losing, that the people on the bench start saying, well, this and that, and we could have made this play, and why aren't we doing this? So get that agreement early on. The one thing that I would, as a small team, if you can get focused on, or, fairly concretely, would be your purpose and values. Your purpose and values equate to your energetic driver in the business. And if you can get really clear on that, it also helps you make decisions. As the team grows and you get traction, things might tweak about your mission. You might see a bit of a different market opportunity, and make sure those things are articulated. But as the team starts to grow, a lot of the times when we have clients come into the door, we don't tend to work with them like when they're brand new. It's usually when they're getting ready to scale. So they're like 5, 7, 10, 12 people. When you start getting to 12 people is when it stops being really easy to create communication seamlessly. When you're at 5 people, everyone knows what everyone's doing, just because of the nature of the team being so small. When you start getting to 12, certainly when you get to 20, you need some, at least, I won't say like huge systems and structures, some like small systems and structures to help that communication flow, so people can still feel like they're bought in, particularly if they've been on the team very early. They want to make sure that mission and vision is being captured and the impact is being made. And 2 things about culture, though. Or I should say, the one thing about culture that's really, really important to know is that it can be created 2 ways: with intention or by default. So when I talk about creating a mission and values, or purpose and values, if we can even come to the 3rd step in that, so when I work with clients, the 3rd step in that, after we solidify purpose and values, are what we call behavioral agreements, which is really just on a piece of paper how we're going to be together. How do we choose to intentionally be together? And that would be related to your values. And so what that framework does is it gives you the opportunity and permission to make everybody on the team accountable for creating culture, because that's not just on the founder or the leader. They can set the tone, and their role will be to hold the context, help manage the energy, and to coach the team, and to help the team own it themselves. You don't want to have to be dealing with every interpersonal problem between people in an organization. You want to be doing your work, and adults should be able to take care of their own interpersonal issues if we have the proper support and space to do so.
I never heard of that. You said you call that a behavioral agreement? I guess yes, I have heard of it because the thing I'm doing now has a component of it. The other thing I'm doing has a component of it where it's about setting behavioral agreements in these hard conversations. And so, but I never thought about that in an organization, and how in setting that agreement culturally and using that as the benchmark for how we engage each other. Have you heard of that, man?
Well, I was just thinking I have heard of different parts of that, but I was just thinking about how we work with really early stage social entrepreneurs, and we start by trying to get them to think through and iterate carefully and kind of cogently their purpose, right? And it's not uncommon for the entrepreneur to start with a product or a service and have intuited kind of their purpose without making it explicit. They got to the product because they cared about this thing, and they moved through a process intuitively, but never did the work to kind of even articulate the purpose of the organization. And so it's interesting for me to hear you talk about the importance of getting clear on your purpose and values, and then translating that not only into product, service, revenue, cost structures, but also into the culture of how we relate to one another. And it makes me think do you get the opportunity usually? Do people call you when they're cleaning up that the culture went bad? Or is that more often, or is it more often that they're like, oh, all of a sudden now there's more than 3 of us, and we need to figure out how to relate to each other. Is that a fair question?
Yes, and I would say both. I would
Okay.
say both. I would say there have been there have been some folks that we've worked with earlier on because they want to be prepared as they come to this.
Yeah.
And I would say some of those folks have probably come from backgrounds where they were like, I was not the leader in the last organization, but I saw how that went. And I would just like to make sure I've got some stuff in my back pocket to help prepare me for when this stuff comes up.
Yeah.
But certainly we see people come to us when they're like, ooh, I think I made the wrong hire. And now this person is managing a team. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that made me, that you said a little bit ago that stuck with me, that I'm thinking about for early stage founders, is you talked about culture is created and leaders go first. And I think like Kyle and I have this friend that he's been on this before, John Rivers, and he leads a large organization. And one of the things that I admire about him is how much he embodies the culture that he wants the organization to have. And so it does occur to me that like even early stage founders, it's worth thinking about like, what do I want this company to stand for and how am I that all the way through? And then it leads you down the road of the things you were talking about before, about like the self-reflection that's required to understand what is my relationship to money? What do I not know about how I'm interacting with people? You know, Kyle and I have been thinking a lot about inherent like microaggressions or systemic bias in systems, and how am I just kind of floating along with the way things have worked. So it's really interesting. I feel like we keep piling onto an entrepreneur what they have to work on, but like this feels important. Like, I don't know.
But I think, but thinking about some of these things earlier, again, now we're knowing what we don't know, or we're starting to maybe like pull out a couple of things that we didn't think about before. But having this awareness as we go forward will hopefully help us out. But I feel like part of the pressure and why we're always like, oh man, there's so much more to do and I don't have time to do it all, or I don't have time to actually spend on my business, I'm in my business. That's also a narrative we're telling ourselves. You know, urgencies are, I feel it. I know, look around, right? I feel the urgency. But I also know, at least for me personally, that urgency over a sustained period of time makes me lose my hair and lose weight and not eat properly. And so I know that this fight to see real systemic change is about longevity. You know, some of the folks that have like indoctrinated me into social enterprise are like 65 and 70. And they're just now, you know, they've been doing this work for 30 years and just seeing a policy change or, you know, employment numbers change. Like, which seems crazy. And I'm hoping those things can move faster, but it's a long game. The game of change is a long-term game. Yeah.
And if you know that culturally, that at some point, if you continue to move down the line where you are, your company is starting to grow, and we understand the impact that culture has on your ability to recruit talent, to keep talent, to be able to sell product, you know, customers buying into you, that at some point, if you really care about this, you're going to have to address this, right? Like, and so it's not a matter of when it's coming or if it will come. It's like when it will come. And so, yeah, like some folks want to get ahead of that stuff. Some people just kind of wait till they get there. But it is important, because if you don't have the cultural component there, you won't have the impact that you desire. And that's problematic, especially if you're a social entrepreneur.
Well, and I can also imagine a situation where, like, if I'm trying to, in my head, stack the priority for the early stage entrepreneur, and there are parts of me that are unexamined, I may be shooting progress in the foot. Like I may be missing opportunities and not realizing it. If I come off as uncoachable and haven't done the introspection to realize that, I'll complain that I can't get a mentor or a partner or a strategic partnership. But I'm putting this problem out there and I haven't learned about it. Or in the case of the woman that you mentioned, if I've got investors lined up, but I have demonized wealthy folks in my mind, then I might be blocking the cash that I need to get going. And so it does feel like there is, I don't want to use the word urgency, but there is an importance to like exploring. And you mentioned that Soul of Money. Do you have any other tools that would be helpful for people if they want to start that kind of exploration about what they don't know that they don't know?
Oh, Ben, how long a list do you want? I would say one book, and you can find some quick YouTubes and videos and stuff on it. I almost said YouTubes. You can find some YouTubes on it. I'm not a very tech savvy millennial, in case you guys have never. Yeah, I do have quite a few. So I mentioned Soul of Money. Another one I would mention would be The Empowerment Dynamic. The book of, what's it called? The Book of Ted. One second, I'm just gonna close the store real quick. Just noisy huppy, sorry. Yeah, The Empowerment Dynamic. So this is it's called, yeah, the old paradigm versus new paradigm. So the new way is called the empowerment dynamic. It's a way that conflict can be based in trust versus based in fear, where we feel victim mentality versus creator mentality. So that's a big one. And then you'll start to see it play out in different scenarios all the time with other situations or people. So be one. You know what? Why don't I take a look through and I'll send you guys a list, because yeah, we
could post that with the video.
Yeah. Are you guys like video people or readers? Are we readers or video or podcast people?
It's a well-known fact.
Kyle he reads every night.
It's a well-known fact that I do not read books. But I know how to read at a very high level. I just don't like to read books. I read like the first page, couple of pages, and I'm like, I got it. You know what I mean? So,
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I will send a few other things, because I mean, depending on what you guys like, yeah, I'll send a bit of a smattering. There's some historical stuff about how, you know, the level of consciousness exhibited by younger consumers is changing. And I want to use it word consumers, citizens. Mm-hmm. Us younger people, you know, we all feel more community minded. It's because we are. There's lots of data behind that I'd be happy to share, which, you know, some of the older folks need to move aside. I appreciate the wisdom, give it to us, and then we'll go do the work. So yeah, I'm happy to share lots of different stuff. We got podcasts, we've got some articles, some books, and I'll find some YouTube videos. Yeah.
Before we open it up for some Q&A, is there a couple things that sit at the top of your mind that the entrepreneurs at the stage that they're at right now, which is, you know, the very early stage, is there some wisdom that you would like to give them that they can, you know, practically use today or tomorrow or next week?
Oh man, I had lots. Well, I think one that I already mentioned, like your health is your wealth, because it's, you know, if you want to be in the game, you got to be in it for a long term. And think about the time you've done your best work. It's probably not when you're burnt out. Sometimes that requires that, but it can't always be that.
So the myth of grinding 18 hours a day on your startup that's a myth?
I hate that narrative so much. Yeah, and I've been in it. And I swear to God, you guys, it's only been since COVID started, when I was forced to stop working, that I actually looked at myself and was like, you're a workaholic. And people think that's cute, and like the hustle and grind culture is like a thing, and oh, it's sexy, and like we didn't work hard if we didn't like go bleed. It's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And this is coming from a very competitive person. You know? Oh yeah, by the way, baby Lauren at 4 years old, when she lost a drawing contest, was in a fit. Okay. Been competitive for that long. You know, but again, I want to nurture. So just knowing what longevity means and what real change means, you know, the future of capitalism is not hyper competitive. It's going to be hyper collaborative. I think you're going to start seeing more closed loops, like smaller circular economies. I think you're going to start seeing interesting cross-sectoral partnerships. And we have to, if we're going to be trying to invest funds where they need to be invested and putting people where they need to be put to address these issues.
Okay. What's another one?
What's another one? I kind of wanted to like bitch a little bit about the fact that when I came into the social sector, I thought it was mostly going to be kumbaya. And like everyone likes to share. And it's like, it's the same as the private sector, I feel like. And maybe a skosh worse, because there's a narrative that all the good work done in the social sector, it's like all friendly, and it's not always. Sometimes we're more concerned about the beneficiary, which is amazing, the end outcome, but we don't think about the people that are helping us deliver those outcomes. And so sometimes our cultures in social organizations still aren't treating people the way they need to be treated or nurtured the way they need to be nurtured. So I would just say, be conscious when you're looking for partners and collaborators, what their opinions on power and impact really are. Are we trying to democratize power? Are we still trying to control power and reinforce narratives that are fairly colonial in their origins? No pressure.
I feel like you just laid out a whole lot of stuff that we could talk about.
I was gonna say, like, it's true. Like, a lot can be like kind of baptized with the cause, and it's so interesting the way this conversation has gone. But like, I think that is kind of an unexamined space in, especially cause-based organizations that grow, because we can justify spending less on culture creation and staff care and strategies for giving away more. And it doesn't make us more productive. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
There's a difference between being purpose-led and purpose-bled. I've been on both sides of that. I feel like maybe parts of this conversation I've been a little more philosophical than practical, but I really swear I've got lots
of that's
very
cool.
practical, tangible, pieces.
No, we like that kind of stuff. We like to hear people's thoughts on stuff, right? Is there one more around conscious business?
I'm just looking. I think I mentioned it before, but I'll say it more explicitly. And it's something I've been reading more about. So this is something I've been learning over the last 6 months that I think is really interesting. And I think gives a lot of permission to leaders to not feel like they have to do everything themselves. Are the 3 tenets of leadership and conscious leadership. First, so your job as a leader is to set and hold the context. What is our raison d'etre? Where are we going? You got to keep that consistent for the rest of the team, because that's how you're going to create your outcomes, right? If we're talking about long impact and real change being a marathon, then we need to be very focused on what piece we're trying to change over time. 2, you got to manage the energy. Money's also energy, is another way to look at it. Yourself, your team, your stakeholders, managing that energy, again, can't be hustle and grind 24/7. There are periods of that, but there need to be periods where we're telling people they need to take space. And 3rd, coach, don't play. So at times you got to be working on your organization, and yes, you need to make time for it, because the on and the strategy part is some of the most important work that you as a founder and a leader will do. And if you're stuck in the day-to-day all the time, you're going to have a business that we would call profit and loss, which is great. Your balance sheet's going to look great. But if you're trying to really, really scale, you have to have core assets. A P&L business and approach does not build assets for you. You need to have a focus on your culture and your strategic growth as well to start creating those assets. So if you really want to scale, you guys, you can't just think about your balance sheet. You got to think about your culture, and you got to think about your longer term vision as well.
Oh man, that's awesome. That's good stuff. So let's open it up. We have a few minutes. See if there's some questions people may have. Anybody has some thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? Yes, Jason.
So I really appreciate a lot of things that we talked about are stuff that I don't always think about. And in terms of the, I like your health is your wealth. I feel like that's what I probably deprioritized the most this past year and before. And so it is hard. And I know a lot of people in the Accelerator have kids. It seems like business plus kids plus health. Like, I know people say that you can do it all. It seems tough to do it all. So, maybe you can talk more about how you strike that balance successfully. I don't know.
Successfully? Something that we've recently been talking about within the Imaginal team is how balance, words are important. And when you use the word balance, it feels like if I'm not doing this exactly, at least in my mind, when I think about balance, if I'm not doing it all the time, I'm failing. So we've started talking about it as more of like a seesaw. Like at any point in time, there's going to be more priority spent on family. At some points in time, there might be more priority spent on business. And so I think if we're just a little more cognizant of how far that dip is happening for how long, because we don't want anyone to like fall off the seesaw, right? So if we're noticing, or someone outside of ourselves is noticing, maybe you need to turn your attention a little bit to this area, then we need to start paying a little bit of attention to that area. So the thing that's helped me recently, Jason, to be, give you some helpful hints, again, me coming back to sports, because for years now, since I stopped playing volleyball, I've not been able to get myself to be active consistently. When, having been, a former jock, that's how you process stress. Basically, you're in the gym like 4 hours a day. And then because I'm a workaholic now, I never go to the gym. What do you think that's done for my stress level? My hair's falling out. Like I say that with, some joking, but actually, like, I have stress-induced balding, right? So those are important things to take care of. So everyone's different, and the things that give you energy differ for everybody. For me personally, getting my butt back in the gym, and I've now just made it like a half an hour in the morning. It's a half an hour. This is now my game day routine. This is how I've had to phrase this. This is like 2 weeks ago, I came to this realization as to why I have not been able to do this consistently, is because I haven't put it in my mind in a framework that works. Just go meditate for an hour. I'm like, that doesn't effing work for me. Okay. It doesn't work for me. I can do like 10, 15 minutes of meditation. I can work out for an hour though. And to me, counting reps is similar, right? So to me, finding a bit of a game day routine, I would never sacrifice the game day routine because the team needed me to perform. I can put that in my mind now. Now every day is game day and life is the game. And so now I'm going to work out in the morning and eat properly because that's sort of the game that I'm taking on, which may seem sort of like I know how trite that sounds, but you got to understand how big a breakthrough that was in my brain.
No, that's I really appreciate that. And I think for me, that's really helpful because I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. To me, it's also equates to like put your own oxygen mask on first. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I talk a lot about balance. I'm an advocate for it. It's in my email lines, all that kind of stuff. Or I shouldn't say balance, but it's just taking care of all the things that are in your life and knowing when to rest and when to Sabbath from stuff, right? Because it's all good, right? So like family, I got a kid, I got a wife, I got businesses, I have people I have to be responsible and accountable for. So how do I show up for all of them appropriately? And for me, that whole context thing is really, really important because especially like the workout thing, right? Like for me, like part of the context for me has become for me since I became a father was the fact that I want to live, I want to play the long game, right? Like I want to be in a good place to be able to interact with him and be around as long as I can. And so for me, that little simple notion of extending my life and the quality of life for the benefit of my son and my family is enough of a driver to put me in there. And I had to like find that because if not, then I was slowly coming off the rails on what I was doing, because I didn't have like football anymore. It wasn't about being the biggest, baddest, strongest person. Because I'm like, well, why am I lifting all this weight? I'm not blowing anybody up at the line. I'm not like, but I was like still in that mentality, but it wasn't working for me, right? There's nobody to blow up. But yeah, totally. So I appreciate you saying that. Any other questions? Let's see here. Who do we got? Matthew?
Nathan's got his hand up.
Cool. We call him Matthew McConaughey because he looks like.
I can't see why at all.
Yeah.
Or
it's a good looking lad.
One of the you had mentioned just the kind of I really keyed in on this, and you just spoke about it briefly, but you mentioned about the future of capitalism and like circular economies. Do you have any, as you talk about that type of criterion, can you tell me a little bit more about how you think about that, or what organizations are thinking?
Yeah, I've got a good example for you. I mean, I think venture capital is one of the oldest kinds of games that's been floating around that has helped drive inequity. I could keep going. That's one sentence about that. But what I've seen, particularly in the social sector, specifically around environment, that's becoming a much bigger conversation, because it's sort of like it's the easiest way to see what's been going on, and knowing that, we've got species dying, et cetera. So one model where I'm seeing that happen, and Imaginal, our founder Dorothy's involved. She's been working with a new fund that's going to be focusing on food entities, and they're about to close the first tranche of funding, and they're all food companies. Those 4 of them are in Nova Scotia, actually, which is kind of amazing. The 5th one is in the US. Those 5 companies are going to be, their waste from each of those 5 is going to be an input into one of the other companies. And part of the requirements of them receiving investment from this new fund, and I can tell you, I'd be happy to share more once it's announced, they have to be using the conscious business operating system, so Imaginal's methodology, to help measure the collective capability and the ability of their team growth over time. Because these investors want to see both people and planet benefit, and they want to have a consistent way that these companies approach growth, because if they're all feeding each other, they want them all to grow together with a similar type of operating system, because now they're all part of the same ecosystem. So if we can all share a language and we all share the same way we look at things, it's probably easier to allocate resources and speak to each other across the boundaries of what we've created in our own organization. And so they're creating this, and the way they're measuring the outcomes of these 5 companies are going to be much more in line with nature. So it's going to be a more eco-centric vehicle than ego-centric vehicle.
Wow. That's so cool.
Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Yeah, and I think
in peace.
Shaping that narrative, or finding the people who have that collective mindset. So I think we're starting to key in on some of these through this social work, and that's really refreshing to hear. So thank you.
Definitely, no problem.
Well, Lauren, listen, it was great listening to you talk about your work and all the things you care about, and baby Lauren. Great job. Appreciate you spending some time with us down south, and sharing a little bit of your collective wisdom, and especially about the conscious stuff like that. I feel like that's applicable to all of the entrepreneurs at this stage. And so once again, just thank you for spending this time with us today.
Thanks for having me.